Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And my wife and I and family have, as you know, traveled many miles, and um, the Lord was faithful in looking after us. We went 8,666 miles in the last 7 weeks. Spent $1,000 on gas and $1,100 on food, and I don't know where the rest of it went, but I'm in a hole. But anyway, the Lord answered my prayer and didn't let the motor die on the truck. That was my main concern. The guy I bought that van off of, Christian fella, and he told me that van's been to Florida 12 times and back. And it's, I think we went through like 20 quarts of oil, and so I was worried about the motor, and the Lord was very gracious in keeping it running. So we're here this morning. We've had some very wonderful experiences. I preached 7 times in 7 different churches while I was gone. We attended several other different kinds of churches. We were in a Grace Brethren church. They observe foot washing as an ordinance. They didn't the Sunday we were there. We were in 2 or 3 Bible churches. We were in a Bible Baptist church. I went to a Bible study at an Assemblies of God church with one of my cousins one night. Rick and Alice go to a Mennonite conference church, and the Sunday we were there, they allowed me to preach, and they inducted him as a pastor on their staff that Sunday. That was last Sunday, or 2 Sundays ago. And with the express purpose of helping him to be able to reach out to the Sikh community. So it's really an interesting relationship they have. So I want to thank you on behalf of my family for your prayers and your concern for us. The Lord surely was intervening and helping. And well, I think we were a blessing in most places. We wore out a few of our cousins. I think we were a week and a half at each time at 2 different cousins' house, and then a week and a half at Alice and Rick's place, and little stops in between. I think we only stayed in 6 motels in 53 days, so that was some kind of a record. And so it's a real blessing to have family, and that was one of my objectives as a father, was to just reconnect with our far-flung relatives and to see these people and to thank them for their love to us and their support. And so we were really anxious to get home. So it was real nice to be home Thursday night. And I talked to Steve last night, and he said that I was supposed to preach on Daniel chapter 8 this morning. So that's where we're going to be as we work our way through the book of Daniel. And Blair was telling me this morning that we were supposed to be in Daniel chapter 7 because he didn't preach last week on Daniel 7 like he was supposed to. So we're all whacked out of order again. So and you'll have to forgive me. I'm sucking on Fisherman's Friends here this morning, and that Michael provided. And my nose is plugged, and my throat is sore, so I don't have much pizzazz, unfortunately. We might have to make it short. But then again, yeah, that's right. And I understand that some of you have been traveling. Jean just returned yesterday, or day before yesterday, with Jimmy. Friday, with Jimmy back from school, and it's nice to see Shirley back. And I understand that you've had surgery too while we were gone. And great. And Amanda is so pleased to be back with Sarah, and she really wants everybody in the church to come and meet her Miller College friends on Tuesday night. Okay, so she says they're a real good singing group. All right. And the Pavonis went across Canada and back. Yeah, I know, it was a big shuffle there. Yeah. All right. Pardon? Are they traveling today? All right. Okay. I just wanted to
make you drool just a little bit. I brought back a couple of souvenirs. This is, we saw these places. We didn't see the avalanche out of that, so we took a picture of that. They've had a record amount of snow out there this year, like 30 feet up the mountain. And a lot of people have been buried in snowdrifts and stuff, and avalanches out there. And we got to drive through the Kootenays in British Columbia, if you know where that is. It's worth the $10 you have to pay to drive down that part of the road. And we, well, I'm off track. We got to see some of these fellas. Bighorn sheep in the Kootenay Range and also down in Utah. We saw some different kind of Gaul sheep down in Utah. We saw quite a few elk. We saw 30 herd of deer one day going through Colorado. The only thing we didn't see was a mountain lion. What? Yeah, we were actually counting herds of sheep, because we were interested. And actually, this fits my sermon today because one of these guys is talked about in Daniel chapter 8. Okay, so let's read it together. What I want to do this morning is to take you through these 27 verses. I want to just survey the vision that is recorded in this chapter. I'd like to relate these events in this chapter to chapter 7, which is really an overview of the end of the book of Daniel. And I want to, as we go through these verses, identify some of the key principles that we can take out of this passage that shows us how God deals with men and nations. I think that's important for us to understand why the world is like it is and what God is doing. And there are certain things that we can learn about God from this passage, and those things have certain implications for us. It's a very practical passage, even though it really is a big picture kind of a chapter in the Bible. For those of you who have been here Sunday after Sunday in the last 7 or 8 weeks, you may recall that the book of Daniel is divided into 2 parts. The first 6 chapters is history. The last the first 6 chapters is history. The last 6 chapters is prophecy, at least at the time it was written. And the first 6 chapters records several visions that God gave to pagan rulers, whereas the last 6 chapters, all the visions were given to Daniel the prophet in private. In the first part of the book, the visions were given very publicly. They were almost political events in themselves. And yet, in the last part of this book, God is showing Daniel privately what God is going to do. And really, the 2 parts of the book dovetail nicely. The vision that the pagan king received in chapter 2 paralleled perfectly the vision that Daniel received in chapter 7 privately. Basically, that was an overview. God was telling Daniel that what he was going to do in the world through time was to oversee that a series of empires would succeed one another. God was going to see to it that that happened. The Babylonians would be followed by the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persian Empire would be replaced by the Greeks. The Greeks would be replaced by the Romans. And eventually, Christ's kingdom would supplant all previous pagan powers. And those 2 visions in chapter 2 and 7 were given in different figures and pictures, but they really were the same message. Now in chapter 8, God is giving a little bit more precise information to Daniel about the changeover between the second and third of these 2 world empires that were to follow the Babylonian Empire. Let's read about it. We have in verses 1 and 2 the setting for the vision. In verses 3 through 14 we have the vision itself. In verses 15 and 16 we have the setting for the interpretation of the vision. In verses 17 to 26 we have the interpretation given of the vision, and in verse 27 we have the solemn effect of the vision. And so a very logical breakdown of this chapter. the setting of the vision. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision that I was by the river of Goulais. The Shushan, the palace, was the summer residence of the reigning monarch of Persia. But his winter residence was in Babylon, far to the west. Babylon is today located in modern Iraq. Shushan is today located in modern Iran. And this was a very large world empire, 6 centuries before Christ. And Shushan was, as the crow flies, 775 miles east of the city of Jerusalem, almost in a direct line east. And that's where Daniel was when he received this vision. He dates it as the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar. King Belshazzar was the last of the Babylonian monarchs. He reigned from 553 BC to 539 BC. It was he that was destroyed by the invading Persian army in 539. And before the Medes and the Persians had actually arisen to prominence and became a threat to the Babylonians, God told Daniel that it was going to happen at least 50, I don't know, quite a few years before. No, it wasn't that far, but several years. I think it was 12 years before these events took place. God told Daniel what was going to happen. Daniel was in his 54th year of captivity. Personally, he was probably an older man, and he says that this was the first vision that God gave to him, because he says he got this vision after that which appeared to me at the first, and that reference is to the vision of chapter 7, you see. And so Daniel is giving his visions to us in chronological order. The first vision of chapter 7 was the big picture of 4 different world empires followed by Christ's final empire. The second vision, as you're going to see, relates to the Persian and the Greek empires in particular. So, the vision itself, let's read verses 3 through 14. Then I lifted up my eyes, Daniel says, and I saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. If you'll notice on the picture of the ram, most of these bighorn sheep, their horns are quite symmetrical. And for a ram to have a set of horns where one is shorter than the other shows a weakness or deformity or damage through fighting. I mean, they've got really thick skulls. You've probably seen the nature videos where they smash into one another in running season. And in the Mede and Persian empire that was to come, God was saying to Daniel that this empire was going to have inequality. It was like there was going to be a deformity in it, and the first horn was going to be lesser than the second, which was to follow. And history tells us very plainly that the Medes to the north allied with the Persians to the south to fight against and to defeat the Babylonians. But after that happened, the Persian monarch kicked out his Median counterpart, his ally, and took control over the empire after that happened. So the Medes were the weaker, the Persians were the stronger. So here's this ram which had 2 horns of different heights. I saw the ram, verse 4, pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no beasts might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out in his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Daniel is giving us a prophecy of what would happen in the Persian Empire. We're going to get the interpretation later. Have any of you ever read anything by Josephus, the Jewish historian? How many have ever read anything in the historian Josephus? Hands up. Even a paragraph or two, right? You can buy that book in the library. You can go to Sault Ste. Marie and read that book. That book was written around the time of the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. It was written by a non-Christian man who was a Jewish zealot. He was a military leader who defected to the Romans when the Romans came down in their final push into Palestine. He became a turncoat, and he served the Roman overlords as an advisor, I believe, and he was a historian. He wrote about the history of the Jewish people in Old Testament times. And so 600 years or more, like 700 years after Daniel received this vision of events that would take place in Greece, Media and Persia and Greece, Josephus actually wrote about it independently from the Bible and corroborated these events. And you can read in Josephus's Antiquities and also in books of the wars that the Persian Empire they actually expanded to the west, expanded to the north, and expanded to the south. And the vision that Daniel received, 700 years before Josephus, fits perfectly. And we continue in verse 5. And as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west over the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran to him in the fury of his power. Now, I just mentioned that this he-goat is coming from the west. I don't have a picture of a mountain goat. Can you picture a mountain goat? They have pretty straight-looking horns that go sort of straight up in the air like that, and they're much more stockily built. They have long white hair, very nimble-footed creatures, and they love to fool around on the crags and the peaks of the mountains. We didn't see any of those on our trip, but so you can just picture, a mountain goat coming and smashing in head-to-head with one of these bighorn rams. Right, that's the picture. But it had, instead of 2 horns, this mountain goat is described as having one major horn coming down the top of his head. It's kind of a weird creature, and the horn is described later on in the chapter as the leader of this empire. Again, Josephus tells us that when the Greeks later on in the 4th century became strong under Alexander the Great's father, his name was Philip of Macedon. He was a very powerful Greek warlord that managed to bring a hegemony, a unity to all the independent Greek states in the 4th century BC. And they just discovered his grave just, I think, 10 years ago. It's amazing, the stuff that they found out in the archaeology of his grave corroborated everything that Josephus said and what the Bible said. And this guy drove out of Greece up past Yugoslavia, where Bosnia and Herzegovina are, where they're fighting today, and he went across the Bosporus and into Asia Minor, and that was territory that was governed by the Persians. And so there was great war between the Persians to the east and the Greeks to the west in the 4th century BC. And we're told here in predictive prophecy how that would take place hundreds of years in advance. It says in verse 7 that he came close to the ram, that he was moved with anger against him, smote the ram, broke his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. The Persians lost. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat grew very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. At the height of the Greek expansion to the east, As they kept going east, they went across what today is Iraq, they went across Iran, they went all the way to the Indus River, bordering the west shores of India. And by 331 BC, Alexander the Great had, in an amazing feat, swiftly defeated the existing world empire, taken control. And at the height of his glory, he committed suicide in 323, I think it was, BC. He cried because there were no more worlds to conquer. His troops refused to go any farther into India, and so he was limited. He had nothing to live for, and he committed suicide in Babylon in 323 at 30 years of age. And so this is, Daniel was being told that at the height of Greek power, when they were at their maximum expansion, the great horn would be broken. Exactly what happened. In his place, 4 strong horns came out, and we read what developed from this. 4 notable horns are a reference to the 4 generals that took over the Greek Empire in 323 BC when Alexander died. We'll come to that. Verse 9, and out of one of these horns, these 4 horns, came forth a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. The pleasant land is a reference to Israel. And it grew great, even to the host of heaven. Now, the host of heaven is either a reference to angelic beings, or it's a reference to the Jewish zealots, the Jewish guerrillas who were fighting against the Greeks at this point in history, and eventually became successful. Not real sure. But this horn grew great, even to the host of heaven. It cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And that's probably a reference to either the leader of the Jewish zealot guerrilla forces, or maybe an allusion to God, that this person was anti-God. And by him the daily sacrifice that is in the temple was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it continued and prospered. Then I heard one saint, or holy one, speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint who spoke, how long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said unto him, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. That's interesting. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. There, in the prophecy, there's 2 angels that are discussing, and Daniel overhears this conversation, and the one angel says, how long is this going to last? The other angel says, 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary of the temple that the Greek leader is going to defile is going to be cleansed. And in history, in the year 168 BC, John the Hammer, he was called a Maccabean. He was the founder of the Maccabean house in the tribe of Israel in the 2nd century BC. Was the leader of these forces, and they destroyed this Greek king called, actually they didn't destroy him, he actually committed suicide or was killed in a horse riding accident way up north. But they defeated his forces in Palestine that he had left, the mercenaries, in 168 BC, and they purged the temple. All right? And so this is showing the demise of the Greek empire that took over and in fact invaded the Holy Land after the Persians, who also invaded the Holy Land, were destroyed. Okay? So in a nutshell, the vision is really a prophecy that God told Daniel while the Babylonian Empire was just winding down to its end. About 12 years before the end of the Babylonian Empire, God said, the Greeks are going to come next. the Persians, sorry. The Medes and the Persians are going to come next. But the Greeks are going to come out of the west and destroy them. There's going to be a major leader that arises out of the Greek, and he's going to die. 4 people are going to take his place. There's going to be a leader that comes out of those 4 leaders that is going to invade the promised land, and he's going to desecrate the temple, and he's going to fight against the Jewish people, fight against me, and he's going to have a career of 2,300 days. A Jewish month was calculated in 30 days. And so this works out exactly to, if I can find my notes here. I thought I had it written down here. Sorry about that. It works out to 6.9 years anyway. And Antiochus Epiphanes, this king that was so anti-God that he actually named himself as the manifestation of God. That was Epiphanes, means the one who shines forth like God. He was destroyed, and his kingdom fell. And so God was showing that even though these people were fighting against his people, in the end they would fall. The interpretation was given by Gabriel, who was instructed by God in verse 16. I think it's God. We'll read verses 15 through 17. This is the setting for the interpretation. It came to pass when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning. Then behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Goulais, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. I believe that's God ordering Gabriel, one of his great messenger angels, to reveal the understanding of the vision to Daniel. So he came near to where I stood. And when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. So the angel was instructed, I believe, at least by an unknown character who dwelt between the banks of the river where Daniel was located, to reveal the vision to him. So the interpretation is given, and the timing of this is all mentioned. I meant to say that Antiochus Epiphanes reigned from 171 to 164 BC, which is a period of 7 years. But the precise career of Antiochus Epiphanes was predicted to be 6.9 years. Okay, so it fits exactly. Verse 20, we are told that the ram was with the 2 horns of the kings of Media and Persia. We've mentioned that. Verse 21, the identity of the goat is the king of Greece. The great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. That is the king that was in the first place of prominence was Alexander the Great. And when he died, committed suicide, 4 men took his place. Cassander was one of his generals, took over the west, which was Greece proper. Lysimachus was another general, took over Thrace and Asia Minor, which is the northern part of the kingdom to the east of Greece. Ptolemy the First took over the southern part of the Grecian kingdom over Egypt. And a fellow named Seleucus, another general, took over the central and the eastern portion of the empire. And he was the one that, it was his dynasty that eventually spawned Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek king, the little horn that came out of Seleucus's dynasty and was the one that actually invaded Palestine, brought about civil war, he offered a pig on the altar in the holy place, desecrated the temple, created, he was the one that, because of his mistreatment of the Jewish people and desecration of their temple, it was against him that the Jewish zealot and guerrilla movement actually began to build to its climax, and thousands of Jews were killed during that 7-year time. But eventually, right after this king was killed, the Jewish independence movement was born, and there was actually a period of Jewish self-rule between 168 BC, after the Greeks, up until about 70 BC, when the Romans came and took over the vacuum in that part of the world. We're told in verse 23 to 26 that, this is interesting, I'd like you to look at verse 23, that in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. I really believe this is another allusion to Antiochus. It calls him in verse 23 a king of fierce countenance. Down in verse 9, it calls him a little horn, and it's pretty certain that this is the same person. Little horn is the same identity as the king of fierce countenance, because it's at the latter time of their kingdom. That there is a reference back in verse 22 to the 4 leaders, the generals that took over the Greek kingdom. So this is clearly a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes, but what is interesting about it is that what Antiochus, this not very well known king in secular history, but very well known in biblical history, what this man did in his short, violent, anti-Semitic career is meant as a picture of what the Antichrist is going to be at the end of time, I believe. I think there's a major parallel. Look at as we read through. He's understanding dark sentences shall stand up. There are 12 things described in here. Third thing, he'll be powerful, shall be mighty, but not by his own power. We know that the Antichrist is going to be demon-possessed or satanically motivated. I believe that any great leader that has ever fought against the Jewish people was either satanically or demonically controlled. I believe the same thing could be said of Hitler and Stalin, of the Arab leaders, and so forth. And wasn't his own power that caused him to fight against the Jews. Fifth characteristic, he shall destroy wonderfully. Great successes temporarily. Fifth, he shall prosper and continue. Verse 6 and 7, he destroy the mighty and the holy people. He's going to actually kill lots and lots of Jewish people. Through his policy, verse 25, he shall cause deceit to prosper at his hand. We know that the Antichrist is going to come on the scene very deceitfully. He's going to have a false prophet that is going to deceive the whole world through his miracles and his lies. And so the career, it's fascinating to read the story of Josephus of how Antiochus Epiphanes got into power and how he made an alliance, a treaty with the Jewish people. He just deceived them, pulled the wool right over their eyes, right, for a period of about 7 years. And we know that the Antichrist is going to have a 7-year career, you see. So there are real neat parallels between this former king of Greece and the coming future Antichrist. Same methodology, same character, and so forth. Same place of operation. And he shall magnify himself in his heart. We know that the Antichrist is going to be worshipped. Antiochus Epiphanes would require people to worship him. He's a very inflated character, right? A very godless person. By peace he shall destroy many. This goes back to his modus operandi of deception. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, either the military leader of the Jews or against perhaps God himself. But he shall be broken without hand. We know that, you know how Antiochus Epiphanes died? He fell off his horse on his head. Okay? Can't even ride a horse. I don't know, he might have been drunk at the time, but he was broken just like that. And the Antichrist is going to be broken at the height of his power, just like that. And the vision ends with, Daniel is told, shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days. Many days would pass before this would actually happen. Now, if Daniel received this at 551, can I write this? if it was 551 when Daniel received this vision, and if the demise of Antiochus Epiphanes is the end date of this vision, we know that took place in 164. The details of this vision, are quite a few years in advance. Let's do the math right here. 387 years before the last event. So what does that tell you about God? Let's think about that for a minute. I think it's more important that we not just learn about the history and the prophecy details, but draw the right implications from it. Think about these things. What is the first thing that a series of visions with all these details that then later on are verified through secular historians? What does that tell you about God? Number one. Okay, he keeps his promises. He's faithful. We'll just write these things down. God is faithful. What's something else that tells you about God? Okay, he has a plan. He has a timetable. He's in control, right? God is in control. There's in theology, the word sovereign is a word. I mean, it's used today in certain parts of the world. The Queen of England is the sovereign of the country. It means that it's kind of a meaningless title for her. Today, the Parliament system throughout English history has stripped the monarchy of its powers, basically, right? But it used to be that the king had power of life and death over every subject in his kingdom. Okay, God is that. He is sovereign. He's in control. What else do we learn about God from this passage? That's right. Quite a few years. And it's interesting that God would allow his own people and allow a dictator, a self-inflated dictator, a godless impersonator, to have a career like this and hold his fist in God's face. God is long-suffering. He puts up with a lot as the plan that he himself is in control of unfolds. So he suffers long. What else do you learn about God here? He is a just and a holy God. In the end, at the end of the day, the holiness of God executes judgment on those who are opposed to him. So God is holy. He is just. He is a judge. The very fact that Daniel received a vision from God, and then later on, I think it was God that told Gabriel to tell Daniel the meaning. What does that tell you about God? He's a self-revealing God, right? By definition, God isn't just somebody that you and I will never know, but God has actually taken a step towards us to reveal himself to us, to reveal his plan to us, to reveal his desires to us, right? His character. So God is a self-revealing God. Isn't it interesting that God uses angelic beings? He is Lord. He's the one, Lord in the most literal sense. He commanded Gabriel to go do this. Right? Now, if he commanded Gabriel to reveal this to Daniel, does that not suggest, and especially at the end, that that this king, this willful king of fierce countenance, when he's broken in the end, what is that? We've already hinted at it here that God is holy. Right? But it shows that God is not just in control, but he's in control because of his character. See? He himself, by definition, is the Lord. He is the great one. He is the one he's God. He has the power. He has the rights. He has all the rights. He has all the power. He has all the authority. By definition, he is the boss. Okay? That comes through clearly in this passage. I think it's wonderful. This is such an encouraging thing to know that our God, who seems at times so distant and allows so many difficult things, that he suffers along with himself in our lives and in the lives of the people that are the apple of his eye throughout history. This whole thing covered about 387 years of history, from the time of the prophecy to the fulfillment of the last detail. You see, and if you include the whole idea of the Antichrist as being prefigured in Antiochus Epiphanes, this is 370 years of Old Testament history. You have to add 164 to bring us to zero, plus 1,999 more since the dawn of the beginning of the modern era. There's a lot of years that have passed since this was revealed, and yet what's so encouraging is that the plan is moving to a point of completion. We're not just here in an endless cycle of, watching television, your kids will be taught. Maybe you have thought that we're here and life just goes on and on and on and on. Ceaseless cycle of existence. You watch Land Before Time, right? That the dinosaurs were here from eternity, almost, right? That matter has always been. You watch the cartoons, there's always an eternal evil fighting against an eternal good. It's a lie, right? There has been a start to time, there will be an end to time, and guess who's in control? It's the God of eternity. Satan isn't eternal. He's a creature. He had a start. There hasn't been eternal evil and eternal good. There's only been eternal good because only God is eternal. You see, and so the plan is moving to an end. In verse 7 it says that the ram's horns were broke. That word. Verse 8, the great horn, Alexander, was broken. Verse 25, this king of fierce countenance shall be broken without hand. It comes to an end. Bang, judged, finished. You see? And that gives me great comfort as a Christian on the basis of the kind of revelation that God shows to me, that the plan of God, even though God allows a lot of evil, it comes to an end. Bang. That's the implication of that to me. The fact that God is holy and he judges, even though this isn't talking about me and you, God is still the same God today as he was then. God does not change. If God was holy then, he's holy now. If he judged in history, and in 164 Antiochus was judged, in 331, or rather 323, Alexander the Great was judged. In 331, the Greek Empire was judged. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. In 331, the Persians were judged. Right? That was when the Greeks finally took over. In 539, the Babylonians were judged. You see? There is an end date. Bang, bang, bang. These key points in history are a reminder to us, are an illustration of the fact that there is an end, that the prophecy and history are both moving to an end, and God is in control. And if God's in control, make sure you're on the right team. Are you on the right team this morning? Are you on the right team? I hope there's no question in your mind that you know whose team you're on, that God is your Lord. Is he really controlling your life? I mean, if God was Daniel's Lord, if he's Gabriel's Lord, if he's really Lord over the Babylonians, if he's really Lord over the Persians and the Medes, if he's really Lord over the Greeks, if he was really Lord of the Romans in history, has he changed his nature? That even though he may not seem very great or real to you, maybe you have doubts about the lordship, God's power to control, but history, the Bible, is full of it. Right? He's still Lord. Right? And if you refuse to bow in this lifetime, Philippians chapter 2, verse 11 says, every knee in the future shall bow, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It's far better to yield the knee voluntarily today, during our lifetime, to reap present and future benefits, than it is to be forced in the day of judgment to, through gritting teeth and agonizing pain, to acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord. Okay? Far better. Well, God is self-revealing. By definition, we have this Bible because God is that kind of a God, by his character and nature. He wants to be known. Let me ask you a question. Can you say that you know God this morning? Are you satisfied with your knowledge of God this morning? You know, that's a pretty deep personal question. You know, I've wrestled with that a lot in my lifetime. There came a point where I was very dissatisfied with my relationship with God, and I had to confess I really didn't know him. Now, he has revealed this to us so that we would discern his character through the events in history.